Stanford University, a school with one of the largest endowments in the country, spent federal research grant money to pay depreciation on a sailboat, renovate the president's mansion, and to pay employees at a shopping center. Of course, that was in the 1990s, but here we are decades later, and Senator John Kennedy is still having to ask the same questions. Where's the money actually going? Why are the overhead rates still bloated? And how is it that elite universities with billion-dollar endowments, how do they continue to drain federal funds meant for research and development? Senator John Kennedy didn't waste time. NIH funding was created to push medical science forward, not to be wasted on overhead. And the clip you're about to watch ends with the punch in true John Kennedy fashion. This is Andy with TrendingPolitics.com. Like and subscribe because this kind of waste gets buried unless someone forces it into daylight.
Senator Kennedy.
Dr. Parikh, am I saying that right?
You are.
Thank you. Do you know anybody who's against biomedical research?
I do not know anybody that's against biomedical research, but I know some.
That's like being against children, isn't it?
It is.
It's like being against world peace, isn't it?
It is.
It's like being against golden retrievers, isn't it?
There's some people that argue there.
Okay. Well, let's get that out of the way. I want to ask you about NIH. I love NIH. I think they do extraordinary work.
Yes, sir.
But isn't it a fact if NIH assigns way too much money for overhead, that money comes out of the basic research? Isn't that the case?
Senator, both those things are providing funds for research. And I agree with you that we need to make the administrative burden and the costs associated with it as low as possible because we do want as much to go to research.
Well, why can't NIH live with 15% overhead?
Yeah. Senator, we have had a partnership that's been going on for 75 years in this country.
Yes, sir, but why can't NIH live with 15% overhead?
At this point, what that would do is actually turn institutions like the ones we've heard about here, it would actually make it to where they are laying off researchers and the support folks who are
Well, the Gates Foundation, when they make grants, they limit overhead to 10%, don't they?
They do, sir, but that is apples to oranges because they count different things.
And the Roberts Woods Johnson Foundation limits overhead to 12%, don't they?
They do. Again, apples to oranges because they count different things.
Isn't it a fact that the universities that receive the most money from NIH also have the biggest endowments?
I haven't checked that, but it probably is true, Senator. And I agree with you. There are challenges that we need to work on.
Well, let's take Harvard. 69 cents out of every dollar from NIH given to Harvard goes to overhead.
No, sir, it's 69 cents out of every $1.69. It's on top of, it's not within.
Okay. Which is 1.6. Let me ask you about one of the worst abuses I've ever seen. It was at Stanford.
Yes, sir.
Stanford was spending 74% of grants from NIH on overhead. Remember that?
I do, although I was in high school at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't. and they audited Stanford.
Yes, sir.
You remember what they found?
They bought a sailboat.
They found that Stanford was spending some of that money to pay the salaries of the employees at a Stanford-owned shopping center, didn't they?
I don't remember that part. No,
I do.
But yeah, okay.
They found that Stanford was spending some of that money that was supposed to go to research, ladies and gentlemen, to renovate the president's home.
Yes, sir.
Didn't they?
I believe so, Senator. Again.
And to renovate the vice provost's home, too, didn't they?
I believe you when you say that. Yes.
And they also charged, Stanford took NIH research money to help children and applied it to depreciation on a Stanford yacht, didn't they?
Yes, sir. Again, when I was in high school, sir.
Now, does NIH audit every year the way these grants are being spent?
They don't audit every year. There's a process for
So they
determining.
just trust the universities?
No, there's a negotiation that takes place between
Yes,
the
sir,
NIH
but if it's a
and the
5-year grant
university. Yes, sir.
and they agree on indirect costs, they don't audit it every year. What if the universities lie to them?
That is absolutely a possibility.
What does fungible mean?
Fungible means that you can move money from one place to another.
And money's fungible, isn't it?
Money is fungible.
I'm ready to have a productive discussion. I've got to go to another committee. Maybe you'll have it today. I haven't heard it.
Yes, sir.
What I've heard is the implication is that anybody who is against asking hard questions about the overhead and spending is against biomedical research.
I wouldn't say that, sir. I think you are a champion.
And I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I don't either.
But every penny that we spend on overhead that's not being audited, and you know as much as I do, Doc, that some of it is being abused, is money that is taken away from research. And that's just a fact.
Senator,
And if you care about this child here, and I know you do, we all do, then any money spent illegitimately on overhead to pay the salary of a professor in the humanities department at a university is coming out of her research. And it's not wrong to ask questions.
it is not wrong to ask
No,
questions.
it's not.
Not at all. And Senator, I think it's actually important to ask those questions and optimize the system.
And I don't understand why these universities cannot live on 15% overhead when Gates Foundation limits them to 10% and the Johnson Foundation limits them to 12%. I don't understand it. All of a sudden, if they don't get 35% overhead, civilization is going to melt.
It is important.
My
to have
mama
that
didn't
conversation.
raise a fool, and if she did, it was one of my brothers.
My mama didn't raise a fool, and if she did, it was one of my brothers. Look, John Kennedy walked into that hearing with a simple goal: expose how elite universities are using public money, not to fund more cancer research, not to unblock breakthroughs, but to pay for buildings, salaries, yacht depreciation. Yes, yacht depreciation. That was a real thing. That's how far off the rails this has gone. The institutions are sitting on some of the largest endowments in the world, and yet they still go back to the federal trough asking for more, and they get it every time. NIH funding was never supposed to cover luxury real estate or shopping centers. It was designed to fund discovery. Kennedy's line of questioning is he always cuts straight through the spin. If private foundations like Gates and Johnson's can set up research grants with 10 to 12% overhead, why does the federal government hand out 30, 40, sometimes even 70%? Why are we allowing money that is meant for life-saving breakthroughs to be eaten up by bloated university admin costs? These schools are not struggling. They're strategically milking the system. And the worst part, nobody in this hearing could answer the basic question. Why can't these universities live with 15% overhead cap? Not one could explain why the number suddenly breaks the system, except to say that layoffs may happen. And layoffs from where? From departments that have nothing to do with the medical discovery and the research? From the university bureaucrats? Look, if that's the trade-off, then maybe that's exactly what should happen. This is the kind of waste that rarely gets airtime. It's complicated. It's buried in percentages and grant language, but it adds up. And every dollar that disappears into overhead is a dollar that could have gone to curing disease, funding breakthrough treatments, or helping the next generation of scientists. The universities know this. The federal government knows it, and they keep letting it happen. So the question needs to be asked again. Why is this still allowed? Why hasn't Congress capped overhead the way that private foundations already do? And why are taxpayers being told just to accept it when universities use research funds to polish floors of the president's mansion? This is Andy with TrendingPolitics.com. Like and subscribe if you're ready to pull the curtain back and demand answers, because until someone asks the hard questions, nothing's going to change.